I was talking with a friend of mine who was Army veteran and was in law enforcement. He was in his like field training time, so he was new officer. He said that, hey, Andrew, that transition that you're talking about from deployment to home back is something that I have to do after every single shift.
Yeah.
Right. I have to do it every time I go home to my family. And he talked about during his first week in law enforcement, a call that he responded to at night that was it's like a gruesome call, and went home and was on dad duty to wake up his young daughter.
Right.
And those two experiences being so close to each other, he said, like, I'm stuck in this. He described being stuck in fight or flight.
Yeah, this is really exciting. I feel like it's been a long time coming. This is our first ever episode of the Sharp Performance Podcast. And, very quickly, just giving a description of the company and who I am, and then obviously our first guest. My name is Max Bush. I am the head of customer engagement for Sharp Performance. I spent 10 years in the Navy, where most of that time was spent in the SEAL teams. I came to this company because it was a mission that I was already kind of pursuing. And when I met the founders, Ben and Andrew, they were actually taking action on it and pulling it into a company where we could take a lot of our experiences that we pulled from our time in the military and share them with the greater first responder community and then beyond. But we'll get into all that in a little bit. First, I have Andrew Sakmar. He's the co-founder of Sharp Performance. He is a 15-year veteran of the United States Army, a Green Beret officer, and really kind of where this company and our journey began. So excited to introduce you to Andrew. Andrew, say hi, tell us a little bit about yourself and what we're doing here today.
Thanks, Max. Yeah, I'm Andrew Sakmar, co-founder and head of customer success for Sharp Performance, and started this company after serving in the Army for about 15 years. Most of that time I was a Green Beret and I just wasn't done serving. Had to step out of that role, had to take off the uniform, but found a way to continue to serve the community in this capacity. So yeah, I'm excited to kick this off. Really passionate about this work and excited for the conversation, Max.
Perfect. We're going to be using something called the hero's journey to put structure around the story that we're trying to tell and what we're trying to convey. At its simplest terms, Joseph Campbell came up with, this way of telling stories, and you could recognize it from any major movie that you've seen. Think Hercules, think Batman. It's the journey that a hero goes on to become who they are, the obstacles that they face along the way, and then eventually returning home with a set of knowledge to share with, a generation of people, a community of people. So real quick, let's start there. Let's paint the picture of Andrew. How did you come up with the idea of how we were using the hero's journey to tell other people's stories? And then we'll kind of continue on from that point.
Yeah, and this is something I can nerd out on all day. It's such a fascinating concept, and what I think it does is, Joseph Campbell talks about how these myths and these stories that we tell are a guide for how we can navigate the world, how we can navigate challenges, right? How to understand our place and our purpose. So it's meant to be instructive. The other thing that's really cool about the hero's journey is it gives meaning to the experiences that you've had, right? It's a framework through which to understand and tell your own story, to tell the lessons that you've learned, to talk about the ways that you're passionate about serving your community, right? And helping others. It allows you to focus on the positive aspects of it too, which I think is really powerful. So the way he breaks, there are some really in-depth books that he wrote about this concept, and we may only scratch the surface, but the overall framework is pretty simple, right? There's three main stages to the hero's journey, right? The first is separation, the next is initiation, and then the last is the return, right? And it's meant to be a cycle that continues to repeat. And there are so many different ways to interpret an experience through that lens, right? But separation is this call to adventure where you go off and you do something exciting, you do something that's unique, you do something that's different and challenging from your normal everyday life, right? You can think about how that shows up in so many stories, right? Like the person is growing up and they have this extraordinary experience where they kick off into this adventure that's really exciting and new and different, right? Maybe that's for some of us, maybe that's our experience serving in the military, right? And then the initiation, right? And the initiation can look like so many different things, but in the hero's journey framework, it's usually a challenge, right? And it's a journey to the underworld, right? It's a challenging experience that changes the way that you understand the world, right? It's where you maybe suffer, you learn, and then there's the return, right? There's getting through that challenge. There's coming out of the other side of that experience and coming back into the normal world. The unique thing about the hero's journey, I think, is in the way that we relate to it, is the goal is to come back, right? The goal is to come home. The goal is to share that knowledge. The goal is to help the next generation, right? Maybe it's your own family, maybe it's your community, maybe it's people that are doing similar jobs or having similar experiences. But what are the things that you learned that can help them to navigate their own separation, initiation, and return, right? So it really builds on itself. And ultimately, I view what we're doing is building a community of people that are sharing these experiences and understanding them and really supporting each other while they go through them.
I think what I'm taking from that whole thing is the ability to accurately depict your story to help the next generation of people, right? It's what have you seen, what have you gone through, and what have you taken from those experiences that we can then share. And, you know, we're so lucky to have worked with so many leading professionals in, you know, human performance and cognitive performance and understanding nutrition and sleep and how all these things affect the human body, and particularly folks who are in high-risk, high-stress occupations, your first responders, your military personnel, you know, pilots, you know, all of these folks are having these same kind of unique personal experiences. I think that's a great way to lay it out. And just to be totally clear with everybody, we're not using the hero's journey term because the self-proclaimed heroes or anything like that. It's just it's a way to line up how we want to talk about what we're going to talk about. And kind of starting there, the journey starts with the ordinary world, right? It's some line of events happened that made Andrew Sakmar who he was, that made him decide to go on this initial adventure. So start there. Like, was there a deep inspiration that led you to serve, and talk about some of the events that happened right after that point that kind of led you into doing what you're doing today?
So, I mean, I come from a family of people that serve. So my great-grandfather, as far back as I understand, right? So my great-grandfather, who immigrated to the United States, served in the military in Europe, right? Came to the United States. And then both my grandfathers served. My dad served. So I grew up with service in the military as maybe even an expectation. Like it was kind of part of, and then out of three brothers, two of us served in the Army. But I was just, from a young age, I was obsessed with Green Berets. Right. I remember reading about Green Berets in Vietnam. In particular, there's a National Geographic article about the Green Berets that were embedded with the Montagnards in Vietnam. I remember seeing that at an early age, and I just thought it was so cool, right? They were soldiers, but they were doing all of these non-standard things. They were dressed up in traditional clothing. They were participating in ceremonies, like the tribal ceremonies, and just dug into that. Read about the MACV SOG teams in Vietnam. Ended up when I was in SF, like got to meet some of those guys. Got to meet Billy Waugh, who passed away I think about a year ago. These legends that went on these crazy high risk missions. They would do it with partner forces. So that was the adventure that I wanted to experience, right? And then 9/11 happened when I was in 8th grade. And you know, Green Berets rode horses into Afghanistan, and it kind of entered the national picture. And I that's all I wanted to do.
Right.
I also remember, for some reason, my third grade elementary school did a graduation, and they asked everybody what they want to be when they grow up. And I think my parents still have it. They still have the green beret that I used to play Army and wear.
Yeah.
And they still have the sheet where I said in third grade, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was like United States Army Special Forces. Like, I was very convinced that that's where my path would lead me.
Yeah, I think it's common, right? It's there's a fascination of exploration and being able to go be this thing that you so revere, and just to paint that picture for everybody. Like, give us the simplest definition. Like, what is a Green Beret? What's the job? Just at its simplest form.
Yeah. So Green Berets is the common term because of the beret, the hat that they wear. Technically, it's Army Special Forces. And the thing that's unique about Green Berets, I think, amongst all of the different soft tribes, is the focus is really on working by, with, and through Indigenous forces. Mm-hmm. So there's a heavy element of cultural understanding. There's a heavy element of kind of doing things in many ways through a local lens, right? Through partners. And to me, that was something that really drew me to that job specifically, right, where you get to actually go to another part of the world and embed in the culture and participate in it. And just very exciting and cool. So
you have this background that kind of leads you in the direction, and then you finally get a chance to do it, right? And of course, there's a lot of things in between, what leads up to initially joining. Talk about, I know you have a military background even in high school. Talk about like how what the Citadel is, and how that led up to you inevitably making the decision, one, to be an officer, and two, choosing the path. Most people, I don't think, understand that. Most folks don't go directly into special forces programs, that you go in the infantry, you have another job first, or something else. So kind of describe that portion of the path.
Citadel, went to college actually, for the Citadel. And right, yeah, it wasn't really on my radar until I was pretty far along in high school. And I just had this recognition where it was like visiting colleges and people were picking what school they were going to go to. And I just thought, right, so all I wanted to do was be a Green Beret. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to assess, like, what's the best way to go do that. Right. And as I understood it at the time, it was to be an infantry officer or do the 18X program, right? Which is where you can sign up as a civilian and kind of go straight into the pipeline.
Okay.
Kind of got talked out of doing the 18X program by the family. Dad and granddad really encouraged me to at least try college first, right? And my little brother ended up he kind of had a cheat code where he went to college and then enlisted, and he ended up becoming a Ranger. But once I started that path, I ended up becoming an infantry officer. I went to the Citadel because I thought it would set me up for success. And it did, right? It did, because one of the mentors, one of the people that I crossed paths with and actually got to work with very closely was a Green Beret officer, mm-hmm, who served all over special operations and kind of took me under his wing early on as a mentor. And I remember he told me, he encouraged me to take that path, right? And to do it as soon as possible. And, for me, that was like a big kind of validating stamp that I was on the right path.
Okay. And that's kind of the portion of the story is the call to adventure, right? It's, you've reached this decision-making point. It's like, all right, you're a college student, you can go pursue any job in the world, but I'm choosing to do this, and that's the call to adventure. Talk about, in between finishing the Citadel, why were you making the decisions you were making, and how did that eventually lead to, being an officer and being in the Green Berets? So,
yeah, well, I think for me, the kind of place where my mind goes with that is the starting in the infantry, right? Mm-hmm. So commissioning into the infantry and getting an opportunity to do that job, right? So it, number one, I was internally, right, I was very focused on getting to special forces. But as soon as I commissioned and got into the Army. Actually, I ended up getting injured and got delayed along my path a little bit, and we can talk a little bit about that. But you get a platoon of, let's say, like 35 soldiers, and they don't care that you want to go be a Green Beret. Like, you have a very real job to lead them, and to really invest in that. So one of the unique things about the path that I took in the military is basically from day one, I was in a position of leadership and had to really like learn that, learn to work with NCOs, which I remember, like, both my grandfathers were NCOs. My dad was an NCO. Some of them ended up going to OCS eventually, but they had some real talks with me before I joined the military. And they were like, hey, if you're the kind of officer that doesn't listen to their NCOs, like, you're nothing.
And an NCO is a non-commissioned officer. Think of like an enlisted person. If you're ever watching a movie, there's, the very obvious officer is in charge, and then there's his men, right? And his men are his NCOs. Is that an accurate depiction?
Yeah. And, so I had challenges and setbacks that I think were pretty significant from like day one almost. So I got injured in the infantry officer course, broke my foot. Didn't just break my foot. I like basically shattered my foot.
Yeah.
At the time, they didn't even like the bone. I had separated a bone, so they didn't even understand that something was broken, and I was still running on it. So I ended up like causing a lot of damage and having to have surgery. They wanted to separate me from the Army. And like at the time, that was just like absolutely unfathomable.
Yeah.
What's funny is, like, I don't know, 12 years, 14 years down the road, I ended up having to leave the Army, due to medical issues anyway. So it was kind of a premonition maybe. I ended up getting surgery, and it recovered. Like, they told me, they said, you're not going to run again. You're certainly not going to be an infantry officer. You're probably not going to be able to even like move around. And I just like wasn't hearing it, and had a very talented surgeon. There's like one guy at Fort Benning that does surgery on everybody that gets injured at airborne school. And so he has a lot of reps, and, thankfully, and by the grace of God, I was able to recover from that pretty quickly and just continue on that path.
Yeah. What are you saying? Doctors are wrong sometimes? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, this one definitely came through, but I had to fight through the screening processes and all the bureaucracy in order to even figure out what was causing the issue.
I think there's a common misconception of what's possible and impossible, when it comes to like dealing with pain and pushing through adversity. And then you meet people from this community, and everybody has their own, went through an entire career with a broken back, traumatic brain injury, all these things. So not an uncommon thing to hear.
I'll tell you what they actually told me in retrospect. They said when they're doing like the pain screening, if they I don't know, this probably isn't like actually standardized, but they said when you're doing that kind of pain screening for somebody in a certain type of job, right? Somebody in the infantry, somebody in special operations, you have to like double their score, right? Because they're just, it's like I had a broken foot, and they were like, "What's your pain scale?" And like when I was sitting, it was like, "Oh, it's a 2."
Right. And that's more of what we're going to talk about, like, right? It's there is a culture of accepted suffering in these communities, a deep stigma to keep things quiet, right? In a lot of ways, it's not a bad thing. I don't want to paint a picture that being tough and toughened through is a bad thing. But when it comes to the mind and the spirit, I think the way that we approach that now, and what we're going to talk about, what Sharp Performance is doing, really is the way, right? And so we'll definitely come back to that. So I think the next portion in the story, thinking about, if you think about most heroic characters in movies, there's this like refusal to call moment where the person knows what they're supposed to do, but there's a hesitation, and that typically then steps into like a mentorship moment, a person, a situation, something that you're looking, or someone that you're looking up to that eventually leads you to really do the thing. So did you have that experience? Did you kind of have that refusal? I'm not really sure. And then maybe a person or something that kind of pushed you over the line to eventually like take the leap and really start?
Yeah. So I think I thought seriously about getting out of the Army before going to special forces. Right. And I know like it was the thing that I wanted to do since I was a kid, but I like really sat down and thought about getting out of the Army and if that was the right path for me. I didn't realize at the time, but I was pretty seriously injured even in the infantry.
Right.
Not the broken foot thing, but I got a traumatic brain injury on my first deployment that was undiagnosed, wasn't treated. I didn't even connect the dots until much later that was the problem. Right. Yeah. So I think I started to see things break down. And if there's a refusal to do anything at that stage, it was the refusal to actually address that injury and to address what was going on. So my first deployment, I was in the infantry, got a traumatic brain injury from an explosion, right, from a rocket attack.
Right.
And at the time, especially in the infantry or in SOF too, there's like no time or engagement with that kind of thing, right? If there's no obvious injury, then you're fine. I think things have changed a lot, right? We came a long way. This was in like 2014, but I started having issues with my sleep immediately afterwards, which in retrospect was a big warning sign. Chronic insomnia, all kinds of weird sleep disruptions and behaviors in my sleep. And I just like hit it, right? I just didn't. So I would go like extended periods of time without sleeping. It was actually quite a nightmare. And the only people that I told about it, I told like my best friend and I told my wife. And otherwise, as I started to see things break down, I would just like look to like the cognitive training program and things to like try to cover down on so there was the brain injury that was undiagnosed. Then there was sleep disruption that was chronic and like very persistent. Then there was brain fog and cognitive issues where I couldn't remember things anymore. I couldn't present in front of groups. And that was all very confusing.
Yeah.
And that was the exact time that I decided to commit to getting a Green Beret. And I was going through that screening process. So you're not going to show up and raise your hand or seek any kind of treatment because the assumption is you'll get screened out of that program.
Sure.
Right. So I just kept doubling down. When I think back to even all of my time as a Green Beret, like those things were showing up. They were impacting my performance. They were impacting my health, impacting my relationships. But I just kept ignoring it. There's actually a story that a moment of clarity for me where I think I understood that there was something going on that wasn't right, was actually sitting down to dinner with my family in North Carolina. My son was, I don't remember how old he was, but he was in a high chair, and we would all hold hands and we'd say a dinner prayer. We'd say the same dinner prayer that I'd said every single dinner for as long as I can remember, right?
Yeah.
It was my family's dinner prayer, and I forgot it. Sitting at the table, I forgot it. It was like a random Tuesday night, and I got stuck. And I had been stuck many times before, and I always had these little tricks to navigate it, asking questions, this and that. But my wife looked at me and she was like, "Go ahead, Andrew." And I tried to spin it back on her. I was like, "No, you go ahead."
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. And she just looked at me like, how?
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
How can you forget this?
Yeah.
Like, who are you? You know, that moment of clarity was followed by no change whatsoever.
Right.
Right. It's like I need to do X, Y, Z for my team. I need to go on the next deployment. There's always the next thing, right? In the military, you're always focused on the next thing that you need to do or that you think you need to do. And I just went right back to that. What I ended up doing, now we're starting to get into the initiation, right? We're good. We're in initiation now. I ended up so thoroughly wrecking my health during that process. It changed everything for me.
Right.
Started experiencing all kinds of gnarly issues as a result of, there wasn't just that initial traumatic brain injury. There was crashing an M-Razor or I guess for people who don't know, the side-by-side. Yeah. Flipped one of those a couple times, crashing parachutes, right? All of the CQB training, which I was an officer. I got relatively little exposure to that stuff when you compare it to everybody else. But all those things accumulated. And I started, I had the experience of like walking in my apartment and just passing out.
Yeah.
Just passing out, hitting the ground, waking up on the floor. and my wife thought I like ran into a chair.
Yeah.
She came out and I was just laying there. So started having some real warning signs, nerve pain that would just onset and would go for days, you know, like excruciating, absolutely excruciating. One of the things that I learned while going through that process, well, one was like getting with a coach, right? A coach. I connected with another Green Beret, read him on to all the stuff that was going on. And he basically told me that when you look at the experiences that I had and the job that I was doing, that it was normal to start to see these things show up.
Right.
And that it was fixable. Right. So that was another kind of call to action for me to go to work. But the other thing was the recognition that endurance was my thing. Right. That was like what I did in my free time. I was always training for work, or I was doing these endurance training events to prepare for what I thought was like the big mission, right? Training for that big, to go to that certain unit, or training for the big mission, for the big challenge that I expected to find at work, right? In retrospect, all of that endurance training was actually to navigate these health challenges that I faced, right? And Aaron and Michael Blevins are their coaches, they're friends of mine. They talk about endurance. What is endurance, right? In like the sports training sense. They say there's no time, like it's not 90 minutes of running where you hit endurance all of a sudden. They define it as endurance begins when you want to quit. And and for me, the idea of, hey, all that training that I was doing, you know, now I'm in a place where like I recognize that like if this was an endurance event, like I'd be ready to quit. Right. So now I actually have an opportunity to apply all of that training, all of those lessons that I learned, and that set me on a path to recovering some of my health. It set me on a path to discovering a purpose and a way to serve outside of the uniform, right? Because in the background here, like I wasn't expecting those challenges. I wasn't expecting to find out that I had to leave the military as a result of it, right? So then how do I put my experiences into context? How do I put that to use to continue to serve, right? And to continue to help others? And I guess at the core of it, if I can't be there with a team, or I can't keep doing that mission in uniform, then I can help take care of them from this side.
I've been out of the military for a while now, so I feel like I can more closely relate to the perspective of the folks who are kind of not from that world looking in. It's like you're falling apart, you know, physically breaking feet and TBIs, and your instinct is to go do something harder. You know, it's like, hey, let's whatever the next hardest thing I can possibly do while I'm suffering here. And I think our key audience, you know, the folks that we interact with, cops, firefighters, can relate to that. Is like the chaos is what you know, right? The chaos is what's comfortable, and retreating and you know, trying to take some time for yourself. It just feels like failure, right? It's like stopping is not an option. So tell me how like that morphed into, which will eventually be, you know, you've had all these experiences. You've chosen to kind of go beyond yourself, beyond the pain. I'm going to continue this next layer of my career. Like, what is it for you? Like, can you put it into words? Like, why did you make that choice? Like, was it that mentor we talked about, or was it just the need to keep going? Like, what is it?
It was out of necessity, right? Because I was so focused on that service and on that adventure that when it ended, I recognized that at Sharp, I don't have to stop being a Green Beret. Like the work that we're doing, my skill set, my approach, the things that I've learned, it's all still very relevant, right? So that's encouraging. The other side of it is, I remember talking with friends in law enforcement about some of the challenges of the work that I was doing, you know, and one that really stands out to me was came home from a deployment for my son's birth, right? And I know you had a similar experience. Many people have, right? It's not one of the really, I think, humbling things is that like there's really nothing that's very unique about my own experience or yours. We actually have all been through some very, very similar experiences. Right. This one was coming home from a deployment for my son's birth and then turning around and going back overseas to meet my team. And, that happened over a couple days period, which felt very intense. But, in the Special Forces pipeline and serving at their group, like we had all kinds of resources. We had sports psychologists. We had all of this whole cognitive enhancement program. We had been trained, right? We've been trained to go into the environments that we were going into. Mm-hmm. And some of that training, was very relevant for transitioning to home and then transitioning back to work. It was still hard. Right. It was still hard. And I was talking with a friend of mine who was Army veteran and was in law enforcement. He was in his field training time. So he was new officer. He said that, hey, Andrew, that transition that you're talking about from deployment to home back is something that I have to do after every single shift. Yeah. Right. I have to do it every time I go home to my family. And he talked about during his first week in law enforcement, a call that he responded to at night. It's like a gruesome call, and went home and was on dad duty to wake up his young daughter. Right. And those two experiences being so close to each other, he said, I'm stuck in this. He described being stuck in fight or flight. Right. He said, for a long period of time, I have just been stuck in this state, right, where my kind of work experiences are colliding with my experiences at home, right? It makes being present with your family very difficult. So I saw that as a call to action, right, for myself and for our community, for us to bring some of those lessons, to share some of those experiences in a way that would be helpful, to share that training in a way that would be helpful for first responders in particular.
Yeah. That was one of when we started this and we started having conversations with, different cops and firefighters, that was one of the things that really took me back, right? You think about our experience, which is you're in another country, you've kind of made this entire mental shift, you've really left the civilian person behind and you've morphed into what the mission needs you to be there. And you're really kind of in your own environment. Right. It sounds bad, but almost kind of dehumanizing anybody else but the team. It's like this is your unit, and not having a lot of the oversight and scrutiny that cops and firefighters have. You're interacting with people within the United States. There's very strict rules and laws. You're on camera, and you're supposed to be able to make these massive personality shifts. I don't even think most people truly understand what cops and firefighters do, right? And I don't think that I understood it until we started really talking with hundreds of these folks. If you can imagine somebody's absolute worst day, a child dies, there's multiple fatality car accidents, people dealing with sexual abuse, and they are seeing and feeling this stuff on a day-to-day, but then still each second have to turn, make that personality shift and be a kind person who can interact with the mother of the victim and then go back to this gruesome scene. That constant shift between trauma and needing to keep a high level of professionalism, I really can't think of a harder thing to do in a job, and I don't really think we're recognizing it properly as a public of when people make mistakes. I'm more interested in what that person's day was like, right? What were the 10 calls like before that mistake happened? Mm-hmm. And what led them to the point where they simply couldn't do the job the way it was asked of them anymore? And that transition that you're talking about, I think really depicts why this conversation is so important and why the work that we're doing is really going to make a tremendous change. So kind of, starting there, right? The work that we're doing, you've had all these experiences, you've had a great career as a Green Beret officer, but now it's time to leave. Why was it time to leave? And then transitioning out of that is then what led you into really wanting to do this? Who were those people, those mentors that gave you the tools to then want to go and, help the next generation?
I mean, they told me I had to leave.
Right.
Yeah. They said,
you're out.
They said you're non-deployable for life.
Yeah.
And not retainable, right, within the Army. So I actually had a really great conversation with my little brother, Chris, who's one of the coaches, former Army Ranger. And he said that it was really important for me to take ownership of that decision, which I think was very important. Right. So instead of being kind of cast aside, he was like, no, what are you gonna leave and go do next? Right. So that was maybe the first time that I got an indication that there was something more important on the other side. I think I started to really think about that. I started to get more awareness about it. I remember there's a really cool experience that I had. I was in New York. I was riding the subway. I was the only person on the subway. I was one of those weirdos. I would always stand on the subway, right? And I was standing in the back, and I was holding the bar, right, that's on the side. And the subway car was like bouncing around. And I had this moment where the static line jump when you're in the airplane, you're like holding out. I know you guys don't do a whole lot of static line. Yeah. So you hook up and you're standing there with your arm like this, and the plane's like jostling around and moving. I was in that same body position on this subway car. Yeah. And I had this like moment of realization that, hey, all of the things that made me good at being a Green Beret, but all the training that I got and the skills that I developed, and maybe like kind of who I was before I even got into the Army, right? The things that allowed me to succeed at that were gonna allow me to succeed at whatever was next, right? So I felt equipped instead of unprepared, right? And then, dude, there were so many things during the transition that were really helpful in terms of mentorship. I went through a program where I was essentially forced to like tell my story, right? Tell my story and talk about my purpose as I transitioned out of the military. I think that was very powerful.
So now you've been encouraged to do the work because you've been given the tools, right? I think it's every person's call, every motivated person's call is to use the things that have been given to me or the experiences I've had to then go to the next thing, right? So one, describe to us within, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, where are we at right now and what's the next step?
Yeah, I think we're coming back to that threshold of kind of coming back to the return, right? We're talking about the return. And for me, the return looked like, I mentioned the other Green Beret that I connected with, and he looked at this, he looked at my experience. He looked at the stuff that I was dealing with. He introduced me to Dr. Chris Free's operator syndrome construct. He talked about how the most important things that we're going to do is like fix your sleep. We're going to teach you ways to get out of your fight or flight response. So I started to get tools. I started to get all the tools that I needed. Right. And really went to work. Right. And like I'm basically obsessed with all of these things now. Right. I started putting this stuff into practice, and I started to see things improve. I started to see some of my like mental clarity come back, started to actually get restful sleep, stop passing out in my apartment. Like that was nice. Yeah. That was a good improvement. So yeah, the more that I started, I guess, like taking ownership and putting these practices into place, started doing breath work, started doing meditation, started sharing those tools with people that are important to me, with my wife, right, who'd gone through all of these experiences with me. Things started to improve. I started to be more present at home, and I just was on fire to share this stuff with other people. Right. And then I started to interact with other people in our community, right? Met you, started meeting some other people that they'll meet through this process. Steve Bunting, our head of coaching. I know he's going to be on one of these soon. But just started to meet all these people that had incredible stories, had come to a lot of the same realizations, and we're just driven to pass it forward. We're driven to share. So what I ultimately ended up landing at is also met my co-founder, Ben, during this process. And we really shared this vision. We recognized not the opportunity that we had, but the responsibility that we had. Because once we started talking to members, we started talking to folks in law enforcement and fire, and the way that they were responding to what we were doing, the testimonials that they were sharing of going through this process, like we were just completely sold out on it.
Right. To see something work that you've dedicated so much time to, it's the best part about doing this job. But I just want to quickly, for people listening, to kind of take a couple steps back and talk about the return, right? Think about your favorite movie character, your favorite hero. The Batman, right? Batman is he's down in the pit, right? He escapes from the pit. He gets all of these. More about this than I do. He gets all his crazy kung fu skills from the Grand Master, and then he returns home, right? He returns home and he's got all these cool assets, and he can build the Batmobile, and now he's got all these tools, and he's returned to be the savior for Gotham, right? There a million stories all kind of follow that same structure, but in this one, it's like a group of people for the past 20 years have been suffering and not knowing what's wrong with them, right? Thousands and thousands of these special operators have came home from war. It's not just special operators; it's what we know. So it's the relationship I make to it. This goes for infantry. It goes for hundreds of different jobs. It's either one of two things. You either take that suffering and it defines you for the rest of your life. You're hurt, sad, miserable, incredible high rates of suicide and mental health related ailments that come from doing this job for a long period of time, or you get introduced to the right people along the way. You gain all of these wonderful tools on how to help yourself, and you're one of the few who actually choose to do it. And then it's at that point that you can share that journey with the same group of people that you came from. You're returning home. And to us right now, it's the first responder community. It's the military community. So talk about that. I mean, you have all these tools now. We got to learn from some of the best people in each one of these spaces and what this means and how to do what we do. What does the work look like?
Yeah, that's where coaching comes in.
Right.
Right. So to have had that experience and to come to the other side of it, right? And none of this is ever done, right? If I stop doing these practices and I stop paying attention to the things that I'm now paying attention to, it'll get bad again quickly.
Right.
And maybe some of that is unique to some of my health issues, but so I have like a no fail thing where I have to stay accountable. One of the best ways to stay accountable is to teach others, right? So developed a real passion for coaching and mentoring and leading other people through this process. And it's incredible, right? It's incredible to be able to have a shared experience. And for that shared experience, whether it's like my experience in the military and then somebody in law enforcement who's recognizing that they're not as present at home as they would like to be.
Yeah.
Or, like in my own case, those like injuries and things stack up to where you're just not who you really are.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea of like not being the calm, present, stable leader and dad that I want to be, like, got to do something about that. Right. So when they're experiencing similar things and you can connect with them one-on-one, it's very powerful. Right. It's very powerful. It's helpful for the coach because you're staying accountable to your own processes. Right. And then for other people, you see them like start doing the work and you start to see things change. Yeah. And they just want to keep going. They're like, what's next?
Well, what has everybody else been doing wrong? I mean, it's not like there's no special, everybody sees the square breathing, this revolutionary that Navy SEALs use to stay calm under pressure. They don't necessarily teach that, by the way. Like, what makes this revolutionary and what has everybody else been doing wrong for so long? Like, why hasn't the regular clinical resources and, healing modalities, why hasn't it hit the community and gotten big yet?
Yeah, I think one reason is I think a lot of people approach it from a position of pathology, right? Of like something's wrong, something's broken. And I don't think that that's particularly helpful. I believe that there's a time and place for all of these things, But in many cases, like as a high risk professional, so let's say you're in the military or you're in law enforcement or you're in firefighting, if you're not sleeping and you're reactive and you're in pain, the assumption 9 times out of 10 is going to be that it's PTSD, right?
The easy button.
The easy button, as Chris Free calls it. You know, in my experience, I was having all of these things were going on with me, and I went to a doctor and I listed them all out. Said, hey, sorry, dude, but I haven't been honest with a doctor in whatever, 12 years, and you're my guy. So here's what's going on with me. And he was patient and kind. The first question that he asked was whether or not I was seeing a psychologist, right? Because the assumption is that it's PTSD. But when you look at the physiology, when you look at the sleep, you know, so we have this mind, body, spirit framework that we use. And when you look at somebody's sleep, when you look at the way they're eating, when you look at the way they're moving their body, when you look at whether or not they're doing anything to come out of that fight or flight state, whether that's a breathing exercise or a meditation, if you start to do those things, you start to see an impact.
Yeah.
Coming to it from a place of experience is very powerful, where there's no stigma, there's no judgment. Like you and I are going through the same experiences because it's natural, right? And there's nothing wrong. There's a path through it. So I think that I think that we deliver a message of hope that is very powerful. You know, we have this whole team of coaches who have gone through these experiences themselves, right? They're not recommending something in a session, or they're not talking about it from a place of intellectual or academic understanding. They rely on these tools.
Right.
They relied on these tools to come to their own return. So they're very mindful of how important they are and the utility of them. So they're real missionaries in that sense.
I think that was my biggest draw, is like, you know, I didn't view myself as a person who had a lot of like skills outside of the ones that I obtained in the military, right? I didn't know how to apply the things that I've learned and, you know, all that. And it's just such a cool thing to be able to get to use our background to encourage people to truly help themselves. You know, I'm not one of those guys who gets so hung up on how every different Navy SEAL and Green Beret, whatever, is making a buck after service, writing books and doing TV shows. Like, it's not, you know, my or our thing, but it's whatever, you know, whatever. I think there can be value in everything, but it's so rewarding to be able to tell myself, like, I didn't just go through all this stuff for nothing. Like, I really get an opportunity to pay it forward. I really get an opportunity to look back at the hardest times of my life and then look at this audience of people and say, hey, you don't have to do this. And if you're feeling the exact same way I'm feeling now, it's become such a brand, you know, the Trident, whatever your insignia is, it's become this big brand that people recognize and they go, wow, you know, it's so cool that this person, you've been through all this stuff. And it's such a disservice to like just talk about the good stuff, you know, admire me because I've been on, you know, this mission or that or whatever. But, you know, how about listen to me and hear about how not to do the things that I've done. And through that admiration that we built with our customers, they're able to like really show up for themselves. And it's the coolest part about the whole thing. Talk about that. Talk about, after every rollout, there's always a couple guys and girls. And a rollout is, we go into a department and we explain to them how to use the application. We explain to them how to use the services, how to interact with the coach, right? We give them a 1 hour long full download of what we do. But there's almost always a moment, you get a couple watery eyes in the crowd, right? Somebody feels like they're really being heard for the first time. They're seeing themselves in you. What does that feel like for you? And, you know, what's going on with them in that moment and what's going on with you?
Yeah, I'll tell you about one of those in particular that fundamentally changed the way that I view what we do.
Yeah.
At a department, we did a rollout, and there was a group of patrol officers that pulled me aside, and they said, they had talked. They were like, we don't think that you understand how important what you're doing is.
Yeah.
And like, that's a big statement, right? Mm-hmm. And they clearly had like talked amongst themselves, and I was like, tell me about that. Mm-hmm. They said, it's okay for us to talk about this stuff after y'all talk about this stuff. Right. You're describing things that we're experiencing. And they said that we're not willing to listen to anybody else. Right. So for me, everything changed from this opportunity to do some good, this opportunity to do something purposeful outside of service, right? For my experiences and our experiences to be helpful for somebody else, right? To have meaning in that context. And it shifted from an opportunity to a responsibility. So I was like, okay, if they're not going to listen to anybody else, then we can't stop doing this. Right. And it was a real call to action. So the amount of focus and attention and diligence, and like it's exactly what it was like in the service, right? Which is a beautiful thing for me and for us and for our team, is we don't have to hang up that purpose and experience that loss of tribe in the same way. I mean, many of our teammates have experienced it, right? But they're coming back into the fold, right? Where we have the most important work to do now.
Yeah. I think you just said that really well. I've had those moments myself. I was like, wow, these guys are, they're really listening. It's like, and it's because we got good at telling our story. I remember our first customer was Hawthorne PD in Los Angeles, and we approached that rollout with not, we'd never done it before. So we were kind of, figuring out. And after like the 20th iteration, people started leaning in more and listening deeper, and more people were staying behind. And I think it was somewhere around that point you pulled us aside and you said, this is about storytelling. Like, you got to get good at telling the story. You got to get good at connecting with people in a way they understand like what it is we're trying to accomplish. And the best way you can do that is through your own authentic story, because it's the truth. It's yours, and they can feel that.
And the storytelling is crucial in so many different ways, right? So the story that you tell, your story, something resonates with somebody and they decide, like, I've had people tell me that it's the sense of calm and focus when we show up and we talk that gets their attention, right? Before they even know what we did or anything about us. But then they shared that beyond that, it's the sense of purpose, right? So I've heard it from multiple different people that the sense of purpose that comes across through that storytelling is something that not only other people want to have, they want to have that clarity of purpose in their own life, but it's very obvious that there's a process that you can follow, right? Getting with a coach, going through that process, telling your story is part of that process, right? So our own focus on telling our own story was very powerful for our own benefit too, right? It's beneficial to the people that you're saying it to, but it's also beneficial for you to distill it and to understand it. That's something that we can offer to everybody when they go through that process, is to have a clear understanding of their own story and how they can, if they choose to continue to be of service in their community, great. If it's at home, leading their family, maybe after seeing some of that breakdown, then great, right? If it's on their team, or if it's something completely new and different, or even in some cases it's coaching, right? It's, hey, I have to pay this forward. How do I do that, right? So there's a path for all of that. And I think that the individual story is central to it.
How long have we been doing this?
2 years about.
2 years. And do you know roughly how many customers right now? How many different departments and agencies? I think it's around 40.
It's about 40.
40.
Yeah.
That's a couple thousand people. It's a lot. It's a lot in a short amount of time. Where is this going to go? How big is it going to get? Like, wrap with one, the overall vision, and then finish with, what do you want to tell? Everybody who's using the Sharp Performance app, everybody who's currently utilizing coaching, Like, what do you want them to know about you? What do you want them to know about us? Like, how do we continue this?
First of all, I really don't like talking about myself, but I've kind of gotten over that, right? But I think that's something that is really unique to my own experience and my role at Sharp, and the vision for Sharp and what's on the horizon is, as a Green Beret, my job was to go to some place across the world with my team, given a really ambiguous and challenging problem set, and having to operate in that human domain, right? And to oftentimes like build up a partner force or raise an army, right? And then understand the common ground between us and them, and then go to work, right? And I think that my role at Sharp as a Green Beret is to build this army of coaches that I think is going to be able to change the world.
Yeah.
And to continue to grow that coaching team and to continue to see the powerful impacts. I mean, we have been changing people's lives for a while, impacting their relationships in a positive way, impacting their health, their sense of purpose, their ability to do the job that they love to do for as long as they would like to do it, right? I don't want people to come up on an experience like I had where they could no longer do that job that they love. And there's always a path through it, right? Because I got right back to doing work that I love. Right. And I think to close it out, that I'm honored and humbled to be able to do the work that we're doing. And I speak for the entire team when I say that we're honored to serve.
Oh, yes. That's the wrap of Sharp Performance Podcast #1. Andrew Sakmar, thank you for letting me be a part of this journey with you. Thank you for coming up with this idea. And we're just happy to be here.
Thanks, brother.